Something has been buried beneath Blind Frog Ranch for longer than recorded history, and Duane Ollinger just found it. After years of failed excavations, destroyed equipment, and a financial toll that would have broken any other man, the ground has finally given up a secret that nobody was prepared for. What lies underneath this Utah property has shaken the crew, silenced the experts, and raised a question that nobody in science is ready to answer. Subscribe and stay until the end, because this one changes everything. Duane Ollinger did not stumble onto Blind Frog Ranch by accident. He came looking for something, armed with old maps, geological surveys, and a conviction that the Uinta Basin in northeastern Utah was hiding something of enormous value beneath its surface. What he could not have known when he first set foot on that property was that the land itself would spend the next several years fighting him at every turn. Equipment that worked perfectly on other job sites began malfunctioning within hours of arriving on the ranch. Drilling rigs seized up without mechanical explanation. Sensors produced readings that veteran operators had never encountered in decades of fieldwork. The ground swallowed tools, collapsed excavation walls, and flooded passages the moment the crew got close to anything significant. Most men would have read those signs and walked away. Duane Ollinger treated them as confirmation that he was looking in exactly the right place. The financial cost of that stubbornness has been staggering. Season after season, the Ollinger operation has poured resources into a property that has returned mystery in place of answers and resistance in place of reward. Investors grew impatient. Experts raised their eyebrows. The wider world watched with a mixture of fascination and skepticism as one determined man refused to accept that the ranch had beaten him. There were moments that kept him going. Strange metallic objects pulled from the sediment, passages that opened into underground water systems far too vast to be naturally occurring, readings from deep sonar equipment that suggested large structured voids existed far beneath the surface. None of it was enough to close the case, but all of it was enough to keep Duane drilling. The history of Blind Frog Ranch is not a history of failure. It is a history of a man systematically eliminating every wrong answer until only one remained. What was recently uncovered beneath that property is the direct result of years of punishment, persistence, and an absolute refusal to quit. That context matters, because what was found underground at Blind Frog Ranch is not the kind of discovery that happens quickly. It is the kind that only comes to the man who was still standing after everyone else had gone home. Long before Duane Ollinger ever broke ground on Blind Frog Ranch, the data was already telling a strange story. Geological surveys of the Uinta Basin have historically produced results that left researchers with more questions than answers. The region sits atop an unusual formation of sedimentary and igneous rock layers that do not behave the way comparable formations do elsewhere in the American West. Water tables in the area move in patterns that contradict standard hydrological models. Magnetic field readings fluctuate in localized zones across the basin without any surface feature to explain the variation. For most of the scientific community, these anomalies were cataloged and set aside as geological curiosities. For anyone paying close attention, they were a map. The specific parcel of land that became Blind Frog Ranch sits over one of the most geologically unusual sections of the entire basin. Early sonar work conducted on the property returned images of what appeared to be large subterranean voids arranged in a pattern inconsistent with natural cave formation. Natural caves follow the path of least resistance through soluble rock, carving irregular channels shaped entirely by water and time. What the sonar revealed beneath Blind Frog Ranch did not follow that pattern. The voids appeared too uniform, too deliberate in their arrangement, and in several cases too deep to have been formed by the water sources currently present on the surface. Electromagnetic readings taken at multiple points across the property showed concentrated anomalies directly above these underground formations, suggesting that whatever existed beneath the surface was interacting with the electromagnetic environment above it in real time. The crew recorded equipment malfunctions, compass deviations, and electronic interference that correlated directly with proximity to these zones. Animals on the property avoided specific areas entirely, refusing to graze or even cross certain sections of the land regardless of what was planted there. Taken individually, each of these data points has a conventional explanation. Taken together and mapped against the underground formations the sonar had identified, they formed a picture of a subterranean environment that was active, structured, and unlike anything in the geological literature for this region, that picture is what drew Duane Ollinger deeper, and deeper is exactly where the answers were waiting. The excavation history of Blind Frog Ranch reads like a record of near misses, each one more significant than the last. In the earliest phases of the investigation, the crew focused on surface-level anomalies, sinkholes that appeared without seismic activity, discolored soil patches that suggested buried metallic material below, and shoreline formations along the ranch's water features that looked as though they had been shaped rather than naturally deposited. What they pulled from those early digs was already remarkable. Fragments of metal alloy that did not match any ore body known to exist in that part of Utah. Carved stone pieces bearing markings that regional archaeologists could not immediately classify. Traces of what appeared to be refined material, processed, not raw, at depths that should have predated any human activity capable of that kind of metallurgy. Each find pointed downward. Every artifact suggested that the significant material was not on the surface or near it, but buried far beneath in conditions that had preserved it for an extraordinary length of time. The crew pushed deeper in subsequent seasons, deploying more sophisticated drilling equipment and bringing in consultants with backgrounds in mining, archaeology, and structural geology. What they encountered as they descended was a submerged cave network of a scale that had not shown up clearly in the original surveys. Water-filled passages stretched laterally beneath the property in multiple directions, some connecting to underground reservoirs that appeared to be fed by sources with no clear surface origin. Divers who entered the accessible portions of these passages reported formations along the walls and ceilings that did not resemble standard limestone cave features. The geometry was too consistent, the surfaces in certain sections were too smooth, and in at least one documented instance, the passage appeared to widen into a chamber of significant size before the visibility conditions forced the team to surface. That chamber is what the subsequent excavations were trying to reach. The flooded conditions, the depth, and the geological instability of the surrounding formation made direct access impossible with the equipment available at the time. Every season brought the crew closer to a viable entry point, and every season the ranch found a new way to deny it, until now. Every previous attempt to reach the chamber beneath Blind Frog Ranch had been stopped by the same combination of factors: water intrusion, structural instability in the surrounding rock, and the sheer depth of the target formation relative to the drilling capacity of the equipment being used. What changed heading into the most recent excavation was not luck, it was method. After consulting with a structural geologist who had worked on deep extraction projects in similarly unstable sedimentary environments, the Ollinger team made a fundamental shift in their approach. Instead of drilling straight down toward the chamber from above, they identified a lateral entry point on the western edge of the property where the underground water table was significantly lower and the rock composition offered more stable conditions for a sustained dig. That single decision changed everything. The new entry angle allowed the crew to work at depth without immediately hitting the flooded passages that had terminated earlier attempts. Progress was slow and required constant monitoring of the surrounding formation for signs of shifting, but for the first time in the history of the operation, the ground was not actively collapsing the work behind them as they advanced. New ground-penetrating radar equipment brought onto the property for this phase returned images of the target chamber with a resolution that previous surveys had never achieved. What those images showed was not a single void, but a connected series of spaces, the largest of which registered at dimensions that made the entire crew go quiet when the data came back. The atmosphere during the descent phase of this excavation was described by those present as unlike anything they had experienced on the ranch before. The equipment was performing, the formation was holding, and the readings coming off the instruments as they pushed deeper were telling a story that nobody on that crew had a ready explanation for. Electromagnetic fluctuations that had plagued the ranch for years intensified sharply at a specific depth, concentrating directly along the path the new entry angle was following. Rather than treating this as interference to work around, the team began using it as a signal, a marker that they were moving in exactly the right direction. The deeper they went, the stronger it got. And then, at a depth that exceeded every prior excavation on the property by a significant margin, the drill broke through into open space. The chamber was real. It was exactly where the data said it would be, and what the crew found inside it was not what anyone had prepared for. The moment the drilling equipment broke through into the chamber beneath Blind Frog Ranch, the atmosphere on site changed in a way that everyone present would later struggle to describe accurately. The first indication that something extraordinary had been reached was not visual, it was the instruments. Every piece of electronic monitoring equipment running at the time registered a simultaneous spike across multiple measurement categories. Electromagnetic readings surged. Temperature sensors inside the bore detected a thermal environment inconsistent with the surrounding geology, and the acoustic sensors, which had been running continuously to monitor structural stability, picked up a low-frequency resonance emanating from within the chamber that had no identifiable mechanical source. When the crew achieved physical access to the interior, what they found defied every geological model that had been applied to the property over years of investigation. The chamber walls were not raw rock. Sections of the interior surface showed evidence of treatment, a smoothing and apparent reinforcement that could not be attributed to natural erosion or water action. The geometry of the space itself was the most immediately striking element. Natural cave chambers form in response to the irregular dissolution of soluble rock, producing asymmetrical, organically shaped voids. What the team entered was not that. The proportions were consistent in a way that natural formation simply does not produce. The ceiling height remained stable across the primary section of the chamber. The floor, while partially covered in sediment accumulated over an indeterminate period of time, showed evidence of an underlying surface that was level in a manner the surrounding geology offered no explanation for. Embedded in the sediment layer and partially exposed along one of the treated wall sections, the crew located objects that immediately halted all further excavation activity. The materials recovered from the chamber floor included metallic pieces of a composition that field analysis could not match to any ore body in the regional geological record, consistent with the anomalous fragments recovered in earlier surface-level digs, but far larger and in significantly better condition. Along the wall, partially obscured by mineral deposit buildup accumulated over what geologists on site estimated to be an extraordinary span of time, a series of deliberate markings covered a continuous section of the treated surface. They were not random. They were not the product of natural mineral crystallization or erosion patterning. They were arranged with a consistency and apparent intentionality that left no member of the team with a conventional explanation to offer. The crew documented everything in place before removing anything from the chamber. The silence during that documentation process, according to those present, was not the silence of confusion. It was the silence of people who understood, without yet being able to articulate it, that they were standing somewhere that fundamentally should not exist. When the materials and documentation recovered from the chamber beneath Blind Frog Ranch were presented to outside analysts, the initial responses followed a predictable pattern. Geologists offered explanations rooted in unusual but not unprecedented natural formation processes. Archaeologists suggested that the markings on the wall could represent the work of early indigenous populations with more sophisticated capability than the historical record currently credits them with. Materials analysts proposed that the metallic objects might be the product of a natural alloying process driven by specific combinations of heat, pressure, and mineral composition over geological timescales. Each of these explanations has a legitimate scientific basis, and each of them, when applied to the full body of evidence recovered from the chamber, falls apart at a specific point. The natural formation argument cannot account for the geometric consistency of the chamber's proportions. Natural dissolution processes do not produce level floors and stable ceiling heights across the primary span of a void at that depth. The mathematics of how that rock formation would have dissolved under the water and pressure conditions present in that part of the basin do not produce the shape of the space the crew entered. The indigenous craftsmanship explanation for the wall markings runs into an equally specific problem: depth and access. The chamber sits at a depth that would have required excavation technology far beyond anything attributed to the pre-Columbian populations of the Uinta Basin region. The passage through which the current team entered was created with modern drilling equipment over an extended period of time. How any population without equivalent capability reached that chamber, treated those walls, and created those markings without leaving any evidence of the access route they used is a question none of the archaeologists consulted have been able to answer satisfactorily. The metallic material analysis produced perhaps the most troubling result of all. While natural alloying processes can produce unusual compositions under extreme geological conditions, the specific elemental ratios present in the recovered pieces do not correspond to any naturally occurring combination documented in the literature for this region or for comparable geological environments anywhere in the American West. The material is not impossible, it is simply unexplained. And that distinction, not impossible but unexplained, is where the scientific conversation about Blind Frog Ranch currently sits. The evidence is real, the data is documented, the chamber exists. What built it, what created the markings on its walls, and what purpose it served are questions that the current state of scientific understanding is not equipped to answer. That is not a comfortable place for the scientific community to occupy. But it is exactly where the evidence has left them. Blind Frog Ranch does not exist in isolation. To understand the full significance of what was found beneath the property, it is necessary to pull back and look at the landscape surrounding it, because the Uinta Basin in northeastern Utah is not a normal piece of American geography, and it has not been for as long as anyone has been paying attention. The basin stretches across a vast section of the Colorado Plateau, bounded by mountain ranges that have historically made it one of the more remote and understudied regions in the continental United States. That remoteness did not prevent the strangeness from being documented. It simply delayed how long it took the outside world to notice. The Ute people, whose ancestral connection to this land predates any written record, have maintained for generations that the Uinta Basin is a place of threshold, a region where the boundary between the physical world and something else is thinner than anywhere else on Earth. Their oral traditions describe the land itself as alive in a way that goes beyond metaphor, capable of responding to human presence and actively resisting certain kinds of intrusion. Those traditions have historically been treated by outside researchers as cultural mythology. The evidence accumulating across the basin over the past several decades suggests they deserve a more serious hearing. Skinwalker Ranch sits less than 15 miles from Blind Frog Ranch. The phenomenon documented at Skinwalker over decades of investigation: aerial objects performing maneuvers that violate known aerodynamic principles, animals vanishing without biological trace, electronic equipment failing in localized zones, and physical effects on human observers in specific areas of the property mirrors in striking ways the catalog of anomalies recorded at Blind Frog. Two ranches, separated by a short stretch of basin floor, producing nearly identical classes of phenomenon across independent investigations, conducted by different teams with different methodologies. The probability that these are unrelated events occurring in geographic proximity by coincidence shrinks with every new data point added to either file. What the chamber discovery beneath Blind Frog Ranch introduces into this equation is a subterranean dimension that the Skinwalker investigations have gestured toward but never directly accessed. The deep sonar work conducted at Skinwalker Ranch has suggested the presence of significant underground structures beneath the mesa at the center of that property. The government-affiliated research conducted at Skinwalker under the AAWSAP program, portions of which have entered the public record through Freedom of Information disclosures, referenced underground anomalies as a component of the broader phenomenon, without elaborating on what specifically was detected. The chamber beneath Blind Frog Ranch may be the first direct physical access point to whatever network of underground structures underlies this stretch of the basin. If the formation the crew entered is connected laterally to similar structures beneath adjacent properties, and the sonar data suggests that it may be, then what Duane Ollinger found is not a feature of his ranch. It is a node in something that runs beneath the entire region. That reframing changes the nature of the discovery entirely. It shifts the question from what is under Blind Frog Ranch to what is under the Uinta Basin, and whether the phenomenon observed on the surface across this region for generations is a symptom of whatever has been operating beneath it all along. Duane Ollinger arrived at Blind Frog Ranch as a treasure hunter. That is the plainest and most accurate description of what he was when this began. He had a theory about buried gold, a geological rationale for why it might be concentrated on this particular parcel of Utah land, and a determination to extract it. The man standing at the entrance to the chamber his team just uncovered is not that person anymore. What the ranch has done to Duane Ollinger over the years of this investigation is something that does not have a clean category. It has not broken him, though it has come close. It has not made him a believer in the paranormal in any simple sense, because Duane is constitutionally resistant to explanations that cannot be tested. What it has done is systematically dismantle every framework he brought to the property and left him standing in a place where the evidence demands a new one. The discovery of the chamber has not resolved Duane's mission. It has transformed it. The question is no longer whether something of significance exists beneath the ranch. That question has been answered. The questions that remain are of a fundamentally different character. What was the chamber built for? What created the markings on its walls, and over what period of time? Whether the connected voids, the ground-penetrating radar identified beyond the primary chamber, contain additional materials or evidence? And perhaps most pressingly, whether accessing those deeper sections is physically possible without triggering the kind of catastrophic structural event that has terminated previous excavations. The financial reality of going further is not simple. The operation has consumed substantial resources to reach this point, and the next phase, mapping the connected chamber network, stabilizing the entry passage for extended access, and bringing in the specialist analysts that the recovered materials now demand, will require an investment that exceeds what has already been spent. Duane has made clear that this is not a point at which he is willing to stop. The argument for continuing is no longer speculative. There is a chamber beneath the property. There are markings on its walls. There are materials on its floor that do not belong to any known geological context for the region. The case for further investigation does not need to be made on the basis of theory anymore. It can be made on the basis of what has already been physically documented. What Duane plans to do next is methodical in a way that his earlier approach, driven by the urgency of financial pressure and the frustration of repeated setbacks, sometimes was not. The chamber will be fully mapped before anything further is removed. The connected passages identified in the radar data will be assessed for structural viability before any attempt is made to access them, and the materials and documentation already recovered will be submitted to a wider body of analysts than has previously been involved in the Blind Frog Ranch investigation. The treasure Duane Ollinger originally came looking for may still be down there, but it is no longer the thing he is most interested in finding. If the chamber beneath Blind Frog Ranch is constructed, something built it. That statement is simple. Its implications are not. The depth alone eliminates every conventional human population from the list of candidates. The geometric consistency of the space, the treated walls, the deliberate markings, none of it fits the archaeological record for this region at any point in the human timeline, which means the timeline is wrong, or the builders have never appeared in it. The aerial phenomenon documented above this basin for generations looks entirely different when a constructed underground environment exists beneath the same ground. Objects that don't depart, they disappear. Transitions, not departures. Duane Ollinger came to this ranch looking for gold. He found a chamber that should not exist, containing materials nobody can identify, covered in markings nobody can read. The Uinta Basin has been strange for as long as anyone has lived here. Whatever is operating beneath it has apparently been doing so far longer. Duane just found the door.